Okay, thanks everyone for joining. Sincere apologies for the late start. Um, that's entirely from me. So what I want to do today is quickly take you through drug and poison information centers. We're going to quickly discuss what a drug information center is, what the what's it called, what the different attributes are, and what it entails in operations. While we're also discussing that, I will talk about um, a few reasons why some things are done the way they are in a drug information center. By way of starting up, it's really important that all countries provide drug information services, either from the healthcare professionals themselves or through the public health service. Sorry, let me just mute everybody. Okay, so if you have any question or something, you can place it in the chat box and we will be able to take your questions that way. So it's important that all countries should run drug information services, either through the public health system or through a service provided by the healthcare professionals through their private networks. And we envisage that those kind of services should include collecting, reviewing, evaluating, indexing, and distributing information about drugs, both to healthcare workers themselves in terms of updates through drug bulletins, info, medicine layaways or laybys, and of course, also through policy documents as well. Those kind of policy documents will be things like what we have, the outputs we have from the therapeutic and antibacterial drug committees of hospitals, and then directed at patients through tools such as patient information leaflets, written medicines information, point of actions around adverse drug events and other such information sources, right? So essentially, that information is directed at three main. So the Drug Information Center provides information to three main groups of audiences. One is policymakers. Policy papers are directed at them. Second is healthcare workers, therapeutic updates, drug comparisons, revisions, literature reviews are directed at them. And then at patients, where we have patient information leaflets, written medicines information, and clinical action notes as well, directed at patients. Now, drugs and poisons information should be supported usually by government budgets, but in places like in third world countries like Nigeria and some developing countries where budgetary or where budgetary focus is not yet placed on such endeavors, it's important that we find a simple enough and unbiased means of providing that information to patients. So it's expected that through our drug and information centers that we are able to provide access to authoritative and independent information to patients, to policymakers, and to healthcare workers. The information must be available in a format that is suitable for the practitioners, for the patients, for the policy workers, and that is relevant to current clinical practice. So it must be evidence-based. That's how we think about it. Majorly, the WHO recognizes independent drug information centers as a core component of national programs to promote the rational use of drugs. Okay, so it's important that each country maintains an independent drug information center. Now, a drug information center is usually, in terms of framework, is supported by uh, it stands on two basic legs, ICT and drug information. The ICT component is that umbrella term, or it's all those components that are covered by that umbrella term that includes communication devices or applications encompassing radio, TV, cell phones, computer, network hardware, and software, satellite systems, that's the internet connection, and so on, as well as those other services and applications associated with them, such as doing video conferencing and distance learning. It's an integrated system of communication and delivery of services. So that service, that drug information service, is leveraged on ICT within the context of a drug information center. And the importance of the ICT is the ability to create greater access to information and communication in underserved populations. So it's even more critical in countries like Nigeria and other developing countries to enable or to put that service on the rails of ICT, because it ensures that one professional is able to deliver value to a larger number of patients than they ordinarily would if they were attending to physical patients alone. Now, what about the other components of the drug information services? The drug information services are a group of specialized activities undertaken by pharmacists through provision of drug-related information to optimize drug therapy by providing rational use of drugs and medical devices, right? Promotion of evidence-based practice and improvement of adherence. There's also the improvement of quality of life as one of the objectives of drug information service. All of these put together help the patient to achieve. So what I mean to say is that all of these services organized together as drug information services are geared towards outcomes, right? It supports the patient's improved clinical outcomes. It supports the patient's improved humanistic outcomes, and it also supports the patient's improved economic outcomes. If you remember, there are three main outcomes for every service we provide to patients: clinical, humanistic, and economical, right? In terms of clinical, drug information services support adherence, supports informed use of medicines and medical devices. So the information provided to the patient, medical providers, policymakers that come from drug information centers are not only about medicines, but can also support the use of medical devices that deliver medicines or other medical devices that can improve the detection and diagnosis of diseases, where, for example, we can talk about rapid diagnosis of malaria, rapid diagnosis of HIV and other conditions that the patient can use a point of care device. Now, all countries require drug information support to optimize the use of pharmaceuticals. Internationally, there are many discrepancies or disparities in access to drugs and knowledge needed to use them appropriately. There are significant deficiencies in the use of drugs, especially in underdeveloped countries or developing countries, right? In spite of the fact that we have something what you can regard as moderately robust pharmaceutical manufacturing, right? That still does not translate into efficient delivery of drug information services. Meanwhile, according to WHO's regulations, that should actually go hand in hand, pari passu. Now, there are regulations that encourage pharmaceutical companies or manufacturing to provide that drug information services. For example, as part of registration control, all pharmaceutical manufacturers are supposed to submit a patient information leaflet or something called a summary of medical product characteristics, right? Both of these papers are important, or both of these information sources are important. The FMPC, or summary of product characteristics, are bundled in large retail containers and they are directed at the healthcare practitioner, while the patient information leaflet are placed within unit packs of medicines and directed at patients. The language is different between the two. The SMPC usually has it's usually written in technical language and is usually extensive. It covers several parts of the medicines, including pharmacokinetics, pharmacodynamics of the medicines. It goes on to discuss important and severe side effects, including rare and opportunistic ones that may not occur regularly in during patient use. So it covers all of those things. Meanwhile, the patient information leaflet is a brief information package that supports the patient's use of the medicines, providing succinct information to the patient, something they can read before using the medicine. So it does not contain technical jargon. It's simple words. It doesn't contain some part of like the pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics, especially data that the patient cannot interpret is not included, right? And things like information about side effects are contextualized, right? So depending on the population that you're serving, the information around side effects that are provided are usually those that are most frequently occurring, those that are next frequently occurring, and those that are important flags, red flags for the patient to seek medical attention when they happen, are included in that kind of information packet, including what the patient can do. For example, in some of the bacterial medicines, right? Some of them may cause photosensitivity. So there's also included information on how to prevent that. Some of the anti-malarials that are also provided to patients may contain information about how they can prevent some of the side effects. Medicines that are provided for HIV patients, the highly active antiretroviral therapies, also include information on how to resolve some of those side effects that may affect quality of life, right? For example, photosensitivity is also one. Rashes, the appearance of rashes on the torso, things like maybe swelling in different parts of the body, things like changes in fat deposits around the body, right? All of those are important information that are included in the patient information leaflet that accompany those prescription medicines, right? So the supply of medicines to our community must be balanced by access to impartial information supporting our national health priorities, right? So drug information is essential to the use of drugs, and inappropriate use is a waste of those resources that have been veered towards that endeavor, right? Now, drug information centers can function locally or regionally. For example, there is a drug information center that's located within our faculty on the last floor. We have a drug or medicine information center. There's also one within the hospital, within Lutz, a drug information center in Lutz. Now, those ones serve, the one in Lutz serves the patients in Lutz. Meanwhile, the one within our faculty, even though it provides support to the Drug Information Center in Lutz, also provides support to the state as well. So we do not only coordinate with the Lutz Center, we coordinate with the primary health care. We also communicate with patients directly within the state, right? Now, aside from those, we also provide training and updates for two national bodies. For example, the Drug Information Center at the ACPN National, right? That's the Association of Community Pharmacists in Lagos. Sorry, their national office that's located in Lagos provide consulting services for them. We also provide we're also engaged in a partnership with the Drug Information Center that is located at the Pharmaceutical Society of Nigeria's national office in Antony, right? So the center within the University of Lagos has a bit of outreach beyond just the local population. So drug information centers can have regional or national reach, and it's important to liaise with other centers to maximize the use of resources, share expertise. For example, expertise in developing medication advisories, expertise in reviewing or reconciling evidence bases for new medicines or new registrations. You know, when you're comparing medicines that have been accepted as first line for a particular condition, it's in the purview of the Drug Information Center to give a balanced view or a balanced report when comparing such medicines. So those kind of requests can come from the medical team sometimes, and then you have to do those work. Communication is also very important, just like we saw under ICT. If you do the work and you do not disseminate it, it is regarded as not done. There are also different levels of drug information centers in their performance of their duty. For example, you can provide, it could be specialized, providing information only to cancer patients, and it can be general, providing information to all kinds of patients. Now, let's quickly look at functions of the DIC or the kind of services provided by the Drug Information Center. The first that we'll look at is assessment, drug evaluation. Now, drug evaluation involves the assessment of therapeutic drugs, which is an important function of a drug information center. You assess medicines based on available clinical and clinical trial information and available research data, both clinical research and bench data, right, that are available about a drug. You use that to assess the drug, and you undertake critical analysis of published research, right, including interpreting results of such clinical trials in terms of relevance to local practice. So, for example, questions like which of these two cough syrups is stronger, or for example, things like helping your hospital to develop their first line strategy for hypertension in Nigerian patients, right? All of that requires you to go to clinical data and go to pharmaceutical research data as well to provide expert advice on medicines when you compare them together. There's also therapeutic advice, which is more directed at patients, even though we're finding that a lot of medical providers are beginning to rely a lot on pharmacists to provide them, especially because of the complexity of care that is beginning to arise, right? So therapeutic advice is where patient request is often urgent, but it's usually around issues of therapy. For example, appropriateness in therapy and efficacy, optimum dosage, interactions, adverse effects, modes of administration, effects of disease states on pharmacokinetics of drugs or pharmacodynamics of drugs, and strategies to promote adherence in chronic conditions. All of those are bundled under therapeutic advice, and they are the function of a DIC as well. that a pharmacist performs. In terms of pharmaceutical advice, this is very key. And under pharmaceutical advice, it's usually with regards to substitution of brand name prescription medicines, right? For example, in Nigeria, this has become very important as key brands begin to exit the country. A lot of expectation is resting on pharmacists everywhere to provide key recommendations about alternatives that are pharmaceutically equivalent or bioequivalent in practice, right? Supported by evidence, from research. So this function is very critical as in view of the prevailing circumstance in Nigeria currently, right? And it accounts for a large part of the savings that patients may begin to experience. For example, over the last 3 months, we've seen the cost of some critical antibacterial substances. For example, amoxicillin clavulanic acid combination produced by GSK Augmentin has seen prices jump from the few thousands to tens of thousands. I'm aware that Augmentin 625 may be trading at something like 60 something thousand at this time. Also, medicines used for asthma, right, that were produced by GSK, for example, Seritide, moved from about 8,000 naira, and they are currently trading at about 80 something thousand naira, right? Meanwhile, there are other products called pharmaceutical alternatives that can be used to replace those medicines, and they will impact huge cost savings to the patients. Now, the question of substituting biologics, which is another class of medicines, with biosimilars, has also come up. And of course, the pharmacist is also looked on to aggregate the data and give unbiased information to support the use of biosimilars in practice. Biosimilars are those medicines that have come up in practice. They are the generics of the biologics, and everyone developing those generic products, right? They are making claims about pharmaceutical equivalence, right? And also bioequivalence as well. But all of those claims must be supported by data, and the pharmacist must have access to such data. There are some activities in PCL, in your clerkship, that resembles some of these tasks, right? I'm sure that when you get there, you will see some of those tasks, and to help refresh your memory. Under education and training, a drug information center undertakes both disease-specific, medication-specific, and complication-specific education for both undergraduates and professionals. So we participate as a drug information center, both at the level of educating professionals, providing updates, and then to students for training, and then other professionals as well for training in the use of medicines. So these are some of the activities. And then there's also dissemination of information in terms of drug monographs, bulletins, brochures to health professionals and policymakers for either to increase funding for a particular disease program or to prioritize a particular medicine as first line, or to relegate a medicine from first line to another line, right? In terms of research as well, undertake research. Drug information centers can be involved in research activities like pharmacoepidemiology, which is drug utilization studies, and then can also participate in pharmacovigilance as well. But it's important to note that these are the core activities of a drug information center, right? These ones we've listed so far are the core activities. And then there are two ancillary activities which are not they are not core practices of a DIC, but can be included in a DIC's operations. One is pharmacovigilance, the second is toxicology, right? So basically, when a drug information center serves as a poison information center, essentially it's practicing as a toxicology reference center, and that's an ancillary function, right? And what you do basically is provide information to support the treatment of poisoning, accidental uh, or suicide efforts using drugs. Basically, just what I've said, Poison Information Center. And basically what it does is maintains database of events reported, manages and organizes training for emergency response, and then maintains database of chemicals and toxins that may be present in the home. Now, what are the resources in a drug information center? Drug information centers should be organized on a cooperative model, right, involving multidisciplinary teams. For example, it's not just a pharmacist that works in a drug information center. There are administrative staff, and then there are also people who are specialized in communication, of course, all led by the fulcrum resource, which is the pharmacist. Now, in this in this case, right, you can have within a drug information center, you can have organizations around libraries, computers, and databases. Of course, database administrators are also important in ensuring that documentation of all that is being done in the center is appropriately stored. Now let's look at the first resource, which is personnel. Number of personnel that will require will depend on the range of services that the range and the breadth of services that are being provided by that drug information center. It's a center should aim to provide a direct service during periods of major demand by clients, for example, during the daytime. And then, of course, extending patient inquiry services may also be favorable. For example, having maybe at least one manned phone after hours, may also be important for those that are not directly related to, for example, a hospital center. Okay, so it's expected that you have medical and non-medical specialists, secretarial staff, IT staff. Now, the pharmacist or the manager will be responsible for establishing and maintaining viable financial base, staff recruitment and coordination, training, promoting the drug information service, identifying and maintaining appropriate resources, primary, secondary, and tertiary information sources. I'm sure Professor Jordan has discussed that with you. So all of that is maintained, all of those resources are maintained at the DIC. Quality assurance and improvement are also some of the things that are done in the DIC as well. Now, liaison with colleagues and other professional organizations are also very important because that's, if you remember, I mentioned earlier on that a DIC can only be run in coordination. So there must be, important or statutory networks with people and other service providers, including government agencies and universities as well. And then, of course, they also participate. The manager is also responsible for strategic development of the unit. Important text and databases. The center should maintain its own library of commonly used resources. Additional books and other publications should be accessible in hard copy or electronically from external sources. Data will usually be from textbooks, databases, data sheets, reports, scientific journals of different kinds, and in all the ranges that contribute to pharmacy, right? So they must have primary access to all of those resources. Primary information sources usually provide the unique picture of data, but it may be very voluminous. So it's expected that you have access to the tertiary as well, which has condensed all that information and makes it accessible. Most patient-related questions can be answered from basic textbooks. So it's expected that a lot of those basic textbooks will be available. Things like BNF, things like BPC, the BP, Martindale, or the extra pharmacopoeia, and other clinical resources, Martindale, and those ones online as well, Medscape and others. It's important to have those handy. Now, facilities are also an important resource at the DIC. We expect that basic equipment will be provided, things like furniture, communication equipment. Remember, we said that the DIC stands on two main fulcrum. One is ICT, which is the interwork of all of these facilities, and the second leg being the drug information service. So there's software for word processing, spreadsheet, databases, presentations, photocopier for providing hard copy documents to patients. Then we have textbooks and electronic resources as well. Now let's quickly talk about finance in a DIC, which is very, very important. This page is blank, but I want to send you the lecture notes containing this part of the text. Now, a drug information center should have an independent source of income and status guaranteeing its stability and objectivity. Funding from external organizations cannot be accepted unless the center's neutrality is guaranteed. Take, for example, funding from pharmaceutical companies to develop information in a DIC is usually not acceptable. So usually you expect that funding will come from grants, and those grants must not come from grantors that are connected to the pharmaceutical industry or to lobby organizations. So a lot of times those funding that support drug information centers comes from government, not from individuals or pharmaceutical companies. The services at a DIC should usually be provided free of charge to inquirers or through a contract arrangement that does not discourage appropriate use of the service to support quality healthcare. Separate charges can be made for specific reports. So, for example, if a healthcare worker has a request and you have satisfied that request, and they go ahead to request that, please, to support this in my meeting, I need you to provide the references and a summary of what you have provided to me as your finding, right? You may charge them for such a service, right? And that, is encouraged. So separate charges can be done for specific reports that do not directly relate to individual patients' care. Now, capital equipment, for example, paying for subscription to journals, paying for internet connection, and management costs like paying your staff and others should be included in your budget. Sufficient expenditure to maintain up-to-date resources is essential for long-term viability of the center. Another thing is training. Another part of this is training. Specific training is required for drug information practice, right? In addition to clinical knowledge and experience, pharmacists, drug information practitioners require communication skills to receive and understand inquiries, knowledge of available resources, for example, primary resources, secondary databases, tertiary resources like textbooks. They are very important that the pharmacist must know what is available and what information you can get from those resources. For example, if you're looking for information about comparison of two medicines, for example, the comparison of artemether lumefantrine as against the use of chloroquine in treatment of uncomplicated malaria, you will likely not get detailed information from a resource like um, pharmacopoeia. In fact, you will not. You will not get clinical information from the pharmacopoeia, right? But if you look at a resource like Medscape, up-to-date reference, right? You will get the primary references and the detailed differences between their clinical outcomes and use. If you check primary references like journals, you will get those factual details. But if you want something like um, drug-drug interaction details, right, between or summary of drug-drug interactions between um, uh, an anti-malarial and let's say important supplements, right? You can easily find that in BNF. You can find that in MDEX as well, right? So those give concise clinical information that you can easily reference in a suitable textbook, right? So the pharmacist must understand where to search for information and where they are properly represented. Also, literature searching skills, that's the ability to run through literature. You must be skilled in that. So you must understand how to use syntaxes to pull information from databases. Also, capacity for critical analysis is important. So the ability to see technical information about two different medicines and make ethical and professional judgment about the two is important for critical analysis. In terms of writing skills, the uh, the pharmacist drug information practitioner must also be able to write reports, be able to summarize complex conflicting data, and provide their judgments as succinctly as possible. Now, the last is quality assurance, right? And the activity of the DIC should be carefully documented. Standard forms of electronic databases can facilitate recording of inquiries. Sorry for a call came in while while the lecture was going on. Okay, sorry about that. So that's like I said, quality assurance. You must document all the activities that has been done and then also benchmark against other centers and identify where to improve, um, where to improve in the DIC. Now let's quickly look at the ICT and Drug Information Services, right? Equipment needed. We talked about these equipment under facilities, and then skills as well that is required in performing the activities in a DIC. We've talked about that, but it's important to mention again that other communication skills required for drug information services, the pharmacist or you must be able to have proper questioning skills, listening skills, responding, reflecting, note taking, and the ability to write summaries from your conversation. Most of the inquiries that will come to your drug information center will come via phone calls, and you must be able to take notes in short form during those calls and refer back to them after the phone call. And in terms of searching for information, you must understand which database contains the information you need to search and then perform the search. Uh, I know Professor Jordan has talked about evaluating literature with you, so I will skip that since essentially what it means, what the emphasis here was to intimate you that regardless of what you find as your primary research, you must pay attention to balance and pay attention to evidence, right? so that you consider all the angles or all the arguments that are tenable clinically, right? And present a balanced view, of course, supported by clinical evidence in whatever question you're providing an answer to. With that, I think we've come to the end of the DIC, but I have a question for you. I want to know, has Professor Jordan talked to you about drug information inquiry? Has she covered that in her lecture with you? Can you just give me a response in the chat area? No. Okay. Let me just confirm. Last class was on reference. Okay, you did evaluation of literature. Okay, so let's quickly go over how to answer the 8 points on answering a drug information question, right? So classically, there are about 7 to 8 steps in providing response to a drug information inquiry, right? Let's use this case study to start that out. A man has presented a prescription for his 4-year-old son, contains a formulation for sildenafil 8 milligram TID. The father has been sitting on the edge of the seat since he came in, and he finally asks you, when you pick up the tin of Viagra powder to compound for the son. So his question is this really the right drug? Now, there are basically 7 to 8 steps that you can follow to, tease out the real concern or tease out the real question instead of getting angry and saying, yes, now I know my job. Are you going to teach me my job? Right? Rather than go that route, if you follow these 8 steps, you'll be able to identify the main question and be able to provide an appropriate answer. So the first step is to secure the demographics of the requester. So if it's on the phone, you must get their name, the sex, age, address, and how they want you to respond to them before you even begin, with the with their information inquiry. You must get that detail from them first. And the reason why is a lot of times, by the time a requester goes off the phone, right, you may not be able to get hold of them to give them the information again if they've moved from where they were, or a lot of times, if a patient will ask you a question and you are busy, researching and looking for how to give them an answer, and the next time you will say, oh, Oga, this question you asked me the last time you came here, they'll tell you, no, events have overtaken that question, right? So the best thing is you must intentionally get all these data from them so that you can respond to them at an appropriate time and not lose that train of thought. The next is to obtain background information. So this person, are they medically qualified? Are they is the person a lay person that will need, that would need to be given non-technical responses, or is this person a technical person Is this person a medically qualified person, but is obtaining the information for someone for a patient, right? So you must obtain background information and also some disease information as well in order to understand how to provide response to the patient. Then you determine and categorize the actual question. So the point here is to strike up conversation or strike up rapport with the patient in a way that you discover their underlying question. In this case, the underlying question may be that the patient already uses Viagra for their what's it called, erectile dysfunction, and is surprised that that same medicine is being prescribed for his son, who is, just a newborn and has not begun any sexual activity, right? So in understanding the direction of his question, you will be able to provide the right answer or you'll be able to decode the right question and search for answers to that. So the next step is to develop the search strategy and conduct the research, right? So this medicine that is being provided for this child who has this diagnosis, is this an established regimen? Is this a first line? Is this the most effective drug for this condition? Or is it an unlicensed indication and the benefit is only moderate, right? All of those questions, you develop your search strategy, conduct the research, and then the next point is you do your evaluation of the findings from that last point, perform evaluation, analysis, and then synthesize your response. Once you synthesize your response, of course, you ensure that your response is at the level of the requester. So you refer back to point number 2, where you obtained background information from the requester, right? Their literacy level, the patient or primary caregiver, all of that, right? You match your information synthesis with that level of understanding. Then you formulate and provide response to the patient in the form that they will appreciate it or in the form that they have requested. Once you do that, then you document the process. And the last point is you follow up with the patient. Okay. So in that way, you would have identified the important question on the heart of the patient, and you would have also provided appropriate response to ensure compliance with their medicine. I hope that is clear. All right. So do you have any questions for me arising from this class so far? We've talked about drug information centers. I described drug information center. I described its function in this class. I described the features or the resources in a drug information center. Sorry, under functions of a drug information center, we talked about drug evaluation. We talked about therapeutic advice, talked about pharmaceutical advice, talked about education and training, talked about dissemination of information. We talked about research as the core functions of a drug information center. Then we also talked about 2 ancillary functions. Talked about pharmacovigilance, talked about toxicology. Other resources that we now talked about, we talked about personnel, and we highlighted the roles of the pharmacy manager, the drug information pharmacist manager, right? We highlighted their responsibilities. We talked about text and databases as part of the resources and facilities as well as part of the resources. Then we talked about finance, how to finance a drug information center. We were quick to mention that the source of finance must guarantee the independence of that drug information center. We talked about training and the types of qualities that, aside from understanding of medicines, that the pharmacist, drug information experts must have. Talked about communication skills, talked about how a knowledge of resources, talked about literature searching skills, We talked about capacity for critical analysis, talked about writing skills, and ability to summarize information. We also talked about quality assurance. How are you sure that how do you ensure that different centers are able to provide optimal information quality to all the patients at all the time, right? So we talked about quality assurance, we talked about responsibility, and we talked about networking as a last part, where we said that all drug information centers must be collaborative or cooperative in nature. With that, we now went on the example to demonstrate how a drug information center processes drug information inquiries. I talked about the 7 to 8 steps required in the classical drug information response. So we talked about one, we talked about the first point, which is the inquiry, right? Which is, we talked about the first point, which is securing the demographics of the requester. We talked about obtaining background information from the patient or the requester. We talked about determining and categorizing the actual question. We talked about developing such strategy and conducting the research. We talked about performing evaluation analysis and synthesizing your report. We now talked about formulating and providing a response to the requester. And we talked about that your response must be matched to the background information, the requester's literacy level, and ability to interpret those technical details if you have included them. If not, then you remove them. And then second to the last, we talked about documenting the process and ensuring that it's entered on your database. And last on the list, we talked about following up to ensure that the issue has been resolved with the patient. If there are no questions at this time, I want to say thanks to everyone. Latest by this evening, I'll send the recording. Is it just anyone that can request information from the DIC? Yes, anybody can request information from the DIC. A member of the public, a patient at the hospital, or a healthcare worker, or even a policy maker can request for information from the DIC. So, in the absence of any other question, I do not see any hands raised or any question in the chat area. So I want to say thank you for your time, and hopefully next week, Professor Aino will come into your class, and I guess she will be finishing up her lectures next week. I have sent a breakdown of or a work scheme for the semester to the class rep. I'm sure he has passed it along. I want to say thank you to everyone. I hope to be with you in your class again shortly. Thanks and have a pleasant evening. Bye, everyone.